Jeff Meeks and Chris Austin invite you to watch your favorite sports event at the Batter's Box at 43 Hermitage Avenue in Nashville, Tennessee. The Batter's Box offers shuttle service to all Titans home games. It's a great place for friends to gather for the game and after the game. So check out the Batter's Box Bar and Grill, and thanks again for sponsoring the show.
Coming up next on Pit Pass, we're going to talk about the 4 most important days of a NASCAR racer's week. That, of course, is practice day, qualifying day, race day, and, yes, appeals day. Kevin Harvick wins at Richmond, and we think he's still the winner. We're also going to talk a little bit about the mayor of Nashville's new budget he announced just last night. There's some interesting things there, and we'll close out talking about Highland Rim and local racing. All that coming up with Larry Woody next, right here on Pit Pass.
From the family grocery hauler to fire-breathing racing engines, the one name you need to know is USA Motor and Machine, located at 51 Cleveland Avenue in Nashville, Tennessee. Give them a call at 615-726-3725 or at usamotorandmachine.com.
Talkapolis, the social media TV network for your city.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Pit Pass. I'm Joe Williams, along with the man, multiple-time state sports writer of the year, Larry Woody, 40 years covering auto racing.
Just Your Highness is okay.
Will that work?
Yeah.
Okay, so Your Highness, Larry Woody. And to be honest with you, we said we were going to talk about the 4 most important days, and I walk in this morning and Larry says, it's Larry's line. I got to give Larry credit. Qualifying day, practice day, race day, and now appeals day.
Appeals day.
2 appeals. As we tape this on a Wednesday, 2 appeals up. First, Roger Penske.
Yeah. And pretty big appeals, both of
major.
Penske and Gibbs. I mean, we're talking about crew chiefs being fined and suspended. They can't be around the track, work with the team. Those are big. The monetary stuff, that's not too big. Roger Penske and Joe Gibbs, they can get the $100,000 or whatever they need under the sofa cushions. But it's pretty big from the crew chief's standpoint, Joe. And you're right. You said we won't know for sure if Harvick won the race at Richmond Saturday night. They're not going to take wins away, but for Penske and the Gibbs operations, those are pretty substantial penalties. And again, I guess a lot of people, including Roger and Joe, are holding their breath to see what NASCAR rules. I think they'll lessen the penalties. I think the penalties, some of the sanctions will stay, but I think they might lower them a little. I agree with Darrell Waltrip. I think both of them were a little severe. You don't give somebody the death penalty for jaywalking, and that's kind of what happened, I think, in both cases here.
The penalties, of course, first for Penske, based on the adjustments or modifications to the rear end housings on the 2 cars that he's got going, including defending champ Brad Keselowski. Now, for Joe Gibbs, this, Larry, to me, is an extremely serious situation for a couple of reasons. One, Matt Kenseth wins the race. Everything's good. They send the car to the R&D center, and they find a connecting rod, part of the engine, connects the crank to the piston, and then it goes up and down and explodes and makes power. That's about all I know. But it was light by grams. I mean, we're talking about the weight of grams. There are 7 or 8 guys on that team who face suspension. And I think you're right. I think they're going to have to do it. But what really concerns me, Larry, is they've taken championship points away. I get that. But the one thing that I really think NASCAR has overreacted, and I think they put themselves in a real bad bind, and this commission, the appeals commission, is going to have to pull them out. And that is the penalty that Joe Gibbs Racing runs the 6 races that everybody's suspended, and they cannot accrue championship points. Well, wait a minute. If they're going to race, but they can't get points, Larry, that's just basic American fairness.
As I say, Joe, the penalties are really extreme for the infractions involved. And in the case of Gibbs, the team didn't have anything to do with it. I know, Toyota, whoever gave them the stuff, is responsible for it, but they just installed it in the car. Now, ignorance is no excuse, but in this case, as you say, it's a matter of grams. Somebody said if they had waited before the dust settled on it, it would have passed. NASCAR let it sit out on the desk, and dust settled on it for an hour, and then it didn't pass inspection. That is awfully picky. Again, But as you know, Joe, NASCAR has a zero tolerance policy when it comes to motors, gas, and tires. You just don't do anything with that, nothing. It's .0000. That's the rule. it's up to Joe Gibbs and his people, his technicians. They get paid a whole lot of money to make sure those things pass. And again, the example we used last week, it's like if Tiger Woods moves his golf ball, it's a penalty. Either moved it or didn't move it. There's no gray area.
Yeah, right.
And when it comes to engines, NASCAR says there's no gray area. Having said that, I do think they're going to rescind some of these. It's just even for the engine stuff, this is too severe for the for the infraction.
Couple of notes. I mean, NASCAR itself admits and says that this difference was absolutely no advantage. Number one. Number two, if you take all 8 of the connecting rods and weigh them, on average, the whole thing is over.
Yeah.
So that means that one was heavy and maybe one was a little light. So there's that issue there. My biggest concern, and this is part of what has happened to the sport, though, Larry, because in the old days, you built your own engines. And if your engine's wrong, that's your fault. This is a situation where the engines are coming from Toyota Racing Development, and they've admitted themselves that we may have had a quality control problem. When you're talking grams on what they're putting out, but literally the engines come in sealed and go in the race car, and when they come out, they go back to Toyota.
And the team doesn't actually have anything to do with it other than installing.
Exactly, just drop it in, run it, and take it out. I understand that there's no tolerance, and I'm okay with that. As I guess Robin Pemberton said earlier this week, we can't find or we can't discipline basically engine builders or contractors, if you will, but we can the teams.
Because they use the part.
Exactly.
And that's the bottom line. It's their responsibility to make sure the part. And we've seen this out at the Fairgrounds and other places, where people would install, for example, the crate engines, crate motors, and something that would be defect or wouldn't meet approval, wouldn't meet spec coming out of the factory. And the racers would say, "Look, all I did was open the box and put it in my car. How can I be held responsible?" Well, they were, and Joe Gibbs is, and again, in the old days, you're talking about building your own engines. I remember Cuckoo Marlin once, Joe got caught at Daytona. He had used too much baling wire and duct tape. And, it's really severe infraction there. But in the old days, you're right. They kind of got it close, and NASCAR said, close enough, go ahead and race. I'd kind of like to get back to that. But part of it's the team's fault, Joe. They've got so many technicians. There were 400 people working for Hendrick, for crying out loud. They got NASA engineers and aerotech specialists and these people, and if they're going to get paid $500,000 a year to make sure a car runs, they better make sure that it runs legally. So that's part of it. The teams are partly to blame for getting it this fine-tuned and micromanaged and mechanically perfect and flawless. And if you're going to tinker that close, maybe NASCAR says, well, you better make sure you tinker correctly.
I wonder if some of this, and I get this second, third hand. I'll go ahead and tell you this, but I have some sources close to the situation down there, Larry, who says that there's some real issues inside the building on Speedway Boulevard in Daytona, and that it's beginning to be those that are inside the family and those that are outside the family, and there's some it's not this, it's not the mesh now, it's more and more of this, and that for the future of our sport could be disturbing.
And I wouldn't be surprised, Joe, if the discussions that they're having there are not the discussions we're having here. How much is too much? And the kind of a philosophical difference. Kind of which way is the sport drifting. And I've had these discussions about the local racing. My position on local racing is these aren't cup mechanics. They're not being paid $500,000 a year to build a late model cars out at the Fairgrounds or Highland Rim or wherever. Give them some leeway there on these. Now with the cup stuff on that level, I'm don't have any problem with calling it a little closer. But on the local division, I've always thought they called it too close for this kind of stuff. But again, I think that on a bigger level is a discussion that's probably going on at NASCAR headquarters right now. How much rule enforcement is too much, and at what point do we risk wearing the fans out? Because I think that's been a problem on local racing. Fans would sit out there all night on Saturday night, get up Sunday morning, we'd have a story in the Tennessee that Terrell Davis had won the big race at the Fairgrounds, and 2 days later we would have a big story saying, no, Terrell didn't win the big race, that Joe Williams got it by default when Terrell's engine was disqualified. It's not that bad on the NASCAR level, but you're right, when appeals day becomes maybe the highlight of the week in the NASCAR news, that NASCAR's got to do something to rectify that.
Well, you'll recall, the first time we met 30 plus years ago, we were both standing outside the old bullpen at the fairgrounds waiting on Sterling Marlin's engine to be torn down at 12:30 in the morning.
Yeah, the race has been over 3 hours, and we're still trying to wait to see who won it.
Who won it?
So, yeah, that's really bad for local fans, local division. And again, NASCAR is not that bad. Fans don't have to hold their breath for 2 or 3 days to see if Kevin Harvick actually won the race Saturday night at Richmond. But they do kind of have to hold their breath to see if maybe their favorite driver, the Penske guys or Gibbs guys, are really going to be hammered and maybe take themselves out of championship contention this year. So that's kind of bad. I don't think you should legislate races and championships and that kind of thing. I know you got to have some rules, but you got to have some common sense too. And I'm afraid NASCAR might be. And again, we go back to who's it? Carl Long penalty.
That's when Carl still hadn't paid that.
Yeah, that's when NASCAR lost me. This isn't quite that bad, that grievous, but it's again, these are big name drivers, championship contenders. And is there a chance that NASCAR could legislate some contender right out of the championship picture?
Well, when you tell a car owner it's 6 races and you race and you're not going to get any points for that, you've put the car owner in this weird position. Do you say, okay, I'll race anyway just for the money? Do I race anyway because I have an agreement with sponsors that says I have to be there? It's almost I just got to take whatever they give me. And again, the rest of them I'm okay with, but this issue of going 6 races and you don't get anything point wise, that really that's beyond anything I've ever imagined.
Just common sense.
Yeah.
Like I say, if an offensive guard jumps off sides at a football game, you walk off to the 5-yard penalty, but you don't say, okay, the score, any touchdowns you score the rest of the game don't count.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just common sense. And again, Joe, you're talking about maybe some of the headbutting going on in Daytona right now. I think that's the discussion they're having, maybe on a little higher scale, and certainly a little better pay scale than Williams and Woody are having right now. But I think it's a philosophical difference, and I think NASCAR's got to sit down and make some of these decisions because, Terrell Davis and I were talking before we came on there about all the sea of empty seats that we see week after week after week. I'm not sure this accounts for the problem, but it certainly contributes to the problem. It doesn't help any.
One other note, at the end of the race, which was a wild race in Richmond, it was a typical short track race.
Good race.
Juan Pablo Montoya, he's got to be wondering just what he has done to be so close so many times. Had this race won until a late caution, and then, of course, it's short track racing on a full moon Saturday night. Everything went a little nuts when it was over. Kurt Busch had a great run, stayed top 5 all night in that underfunded team. And then the green-white checker, a lot of movement. A lot of guys got moved around, pushed around. I don't think Matt Kenseth was real happy with some folks. And
Tony Stewart
Busch,
certainly wasn't happy.
Kurt wasn't happy with Kenseth, and he came up and moved him and thought things were good. And about that time, Tony Stewart came up behind him and said, "Oh, you're mad at him? Let me tell you what I think of you." Yeah. And it even went on into the garage area where they exchanged words. There's no physical issues, but they exchanged words.
I like Tony Stewart, but he's becoming a crybaby. Tony,
his frustration's coming through.
It's stock car racing, as Dale Earnhardt said. It's not tennis. If you don't want any contact, get you a tennis racket and go play tennis. But the weekly whine by Tony is becoming a little irritating, and all they're doing is trying to win the race. It's the end of the race. It's the final laps. This is about 2 or 3 times this year that's happened that Tony's gotten bumped by somebody, just horrors. Somebody bumped Tony. You're trying to win a stock car race. So if you don't want any contact, go back to Indy, or like Earnhardt said, take up tennis. But if you're going to race stock cars, NASCAR, and the race is on the line, don't whine every time somebody scrapes your car.
Now, for those of you, I think you're right. And the other half is for those of you who've been watching this for a while, let me tell you to grab a good tight grip on your mobile device, because last week, I said that Kyle Busch handled himself really well. I thought Kurt Busch handled himself really well in the post-race interviews about what happened. So, it may have been a full moon. I don't know. Maybe the tides were shifting up that way or something. But I thought they did. I thought they handled themselves well.
And speaking of Kurt, Joe, I don't know of anybody the last season and so far this season that squeezed more out of a mid-level car, or maybe even kind of the back of the pack cars, than Kurt has. You're right. James Finch last year took a car that's at best mid-level equipment and ran up front. This year he's doing the same with the furniture row stuff. And again, this is not a rap on these people. The teams, they're doing as well as they can with what they've got to work with, but they're both underfunded teams, and yet Kurt Busch is taking these back of the pack, mid-level at best cars and putting them up front. That's an amazing tribute to his driving talent. Sure, that's driver there. That's not car. That's driver.
Let's not forget he is a past champion.
Yep.
I'm not sure if he's sprint or
and
whatever
one
it was.
Sprint.
It's kind of moved around a little bit.
I guess it's Nextel when he won it. But, and probably might have been in line to win maybe one or two more if he could control himself. I've often said the only driver that can beat the Busch brothers are the Busch brothers. Yeah. If they can control themselves, they can beat anybody else on the track.
Our producer's going to beat us if we don't take a break. We got a little verbose there, but boy, hope you enjoyed it. When we come back, we're going to move to more of a local angle, if you will. The mayor of Nashville, Karl Dean, released his budget yesterday, and no, Fairgrounds is not in it. We'll talk about that, Mason Mingus, and more coming up on Pit Pass.
From the family grocery hauler to fire-breathing racing engines, the one name you need to know is USA Motor and Machine, located at 51 Cleveland Avenue in Nashville, Tennessee. Give them a call at 615-726-3725 or at usamotorandmachine.com.
And welcome back, everybody, to Pit Pass. Larry Woody, Joe Williams, having a good time. Hope you are, too. We want to thank you for joining us.
I feel good when I get to rage once in a while.
Well, it helps.
It clears the system, doesn't it?
It really does. Of course, you're purging your system 3-4 times a day.
Yeah. I'll rant on the way home, Jeff. But the next one is one of our favorites.
Here comes a rant for you. Nashville Mayor Karl Dean has announced his proposed budget for the coming year. Now, one of the differences is that for the first time in history, the Tennessee State Fairgrounds has said that they're going to need a little financial help from Metro. Mm-hmm. This is after 50 years they've asked for some help.
And Metro's response is
no.
Yeah.
Matter of fact,
keep in touch.
Yeah.
Good
Give
luck.
us a call.
Yeah.
The mayor's budget calls for no subsidies for the fairgrounds, for the old municipal auditorium, which they've been supporting for 100 years. Well, not 100, but you know what I'm saying. And the farmers market, which they've been pouring money into for years. The budget director, Rich Riebling, who is a former chairman of the Tennessee State Fair Board and put into place many of the reforms that have led to the rainy day fund not existing for the State Fair Board anymore, says that the reason for this is to force these entities, hopefully, into being more creative in generating revenue. Larry, two thoughts on that one. First off, if the State Fair and Farmers Market and the Municipal Auditorium do not receive any kind of assistance or subsidy from Metro, then I assume that I missed somewhere in the budget where we are removing the subsidies for LP Field and for Bridgestone Arena, which is in the millions of dollars.
And for all these silly statues it keeps bringing up around the city. Or Silver Mockingbird in Shelby Park for
I haven't figured that one out.
Or whatever. You're right, and the budget I think is about 1.8 million. It represents almost a billion. Represents almost a 6% increase. Mm-hmm. That's a whole lot of no tax increase unless it's something that was cleverly disguised, like the no property tax increase a few years ago, and I get my property tax bill that's $500 more. I inquired, well, we didn't increase the property rate, we increased the appraisal value of your home. So I didn't realize I lived in a mansion, but I was tough. But anyway, point being, they seem to be able to find money for everything else. As I say, this is almost a 6% increase in the budget, but yet they can't find a few bucks for the fairgrounds, and it's almost insulting, Joe, when that they consider the taxpayer this gullible or naive or whatever. It's no secret they don't like, the administration doesn't like the fairgrounds, any of the events, stock car racing, flea markets, Christmas Village, any of that stuff, the outdoor shows and that kind of stuff, the Bubba stuff that you and I like, and a whole lot of taxpayers like. They can't find a few crumbs to throw out there, but they can increase a $1.8 million budget by almost 6% and have plenty of money for everything else. And I agree with Rich and the mayor on one thing, that some of these places should find out how to, in other words, be more creative and make do for less or for the same amount they had last year. My problem is, I think they should, all departments and everybody should have to do the same thing that they expect the fairgrounds to do, cut back or at least hold the line on expenses, but they don't. Everybody else is getting increases, and yet they can't even give anything, nothing, not even a few crumbs for the fairgrounds.
Part of this problem, too, belongs in the hands of the Tennessee State Fairgrounds. On several occasions over the past 18 to 24 months, they have taken a lower bid. They have left money on the table. Larry, earlier this year, they went so far as to turn down $1 million offer to operate the state fair in favor of about $250,000, $350,000. It's hard for me to understand.
Somebody still got to explain that to me. If I'm selling a product and you say, I'll give you $50,000, and Terrell Davis says, I'll give you $200,000, let me think about it now, and then it's mind-boggling. You even have to consider it. What's doubly mind-boggling, they go with the low bid.
Yeah.
Nobody's still explained that to me.
They may have gotten a little bit confused in that, governments usually take the lowest and best bid when they're buying something. And I think they may have gotten confused. They didn't realize they were selling. Yeah. They thought they were buying.
They had that's the only, had it turned upside down.
That's the only thing I can figure.
Here's some advice. I'm no financial whiz. Take the high bid. If everything else is equal, take the bid that gives you the most money. It doesn't seem that complicated to me. Again, Joe, you just wonder if this is, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I will, if maybe this is just part of the no secret plan to put this place out of business. The more difficulties you can heap on it, the more it's already struggling, and the greater the struggles will be. You can only push big rocks uphill so long until you give in, and I think the administration keeps adding to the burden that the fairgrounds been under for years.
I think they believe it's a war of attrition. They will eventually
just wear them down, bleed them dry.
Yeah. Call them Sherman.
Yep.
Yep. Ask the folks in Atlanta about Sherman.
And it's disappointing, Joe, pardon me, because when we go out there, the crowds are good. The racing crowd's been pretty good. I went out for...
Flea market crowd's been great.
Flea market crowds are great. Christmas Village, that kind of thing. I went out in February for an outdoor show, fishing boat show. It was packed. People were lined up around down on another street waiting to get in. The parking lots were literally overflowing. I talked to one of the show people, booth people, and he said that's an ideal place. He said he'd much rather be out there than the downtown auditorium, the convention center, anything there, because there's no parking. You've got to get the products in and out, the boats and that kind of stuff. He said it's just a nightmare downtown. He said the fairgrounds is ideal for those kinds of conventions where you got big ticket items, trailers, boats, that kind of thing, plenty of parking, and it's just perfect for what they're doing. And yet the city seems to be determined to do away with it. I just don't understand it.
That's a good point. I wonder, I did not get a chance to see, I wonder what the subsidy is for the debt service and operation and opening of the new Music City Convention Center. Well, I'll call it what I think it is, the personal plan of the mayor. All right. Just so you'll know, I've got the real feeling, Larry, we're going to be following that story because I think there's some things that'll have to change there. We've had Dwayne Domney on this show before, and I'm sure he'll have a few things.
Councilman
Domney.
The big picture, Joe, I think, and you said it before the segment, I think this is just another indication of the administration is determined to close this place down and end stock car racing along with the other events. Yeah, I don't think there's any.
Even though the referendum was a slam dunk.
There's always ways to get around what the public might want.
Oh yeah.
And that's what they're doing.
Yeah. Speaking of slam dunks and switching gears a little bit, Mason Mingus got to slam dunk just a little bit, recovered at Salem Speedway over the weekend. Mason now goes to Talladega with the ARCA guys. He is in second place behind Frank Kimmel, who, by the way, Salem's his home racetrack, so you should have expected this coming. He's raced there since he was a baby, and that was back when they had chariots. Just kidding, Frank. But Mason goes in about 30 points down to Talladega, and we wish him well, Larry. Talladega weekend.
And Mason, a bright young kid, 18-year-old kid from Brentwood, And we've had him on the show before, just a really super kid. And I think he's got an unlimited future. He's a great racing talent. As you said, he's trailing Frank Kimmel in the ARCA standings, which is pretty good, 18-year-old kid. He's bright, he's personable, he's articulate, he presents himself well in front of with the media forums. Unlimited potential. Going into Talladega, I'll admit I'm holding my breath. I talked to Mason earlier this week about it for a magazine story I'm working on. And my last words were, be careful out there. Good luck and be careful. I still hold my breath, Joe, when ARCA goes to Talladega, which they'll be racing there Friday. The angle I'm taking, kind of interesting, James Hilton is racing at Talladega, 78 years old.
I was going to say, how old is he?
And Mason is 18. James Hilton is 78. Races like a teenager, is late for a prom date.
Yeah.
But what a great story. I'm doing a magazine profile of him, talked to Hilton. And
well, Hilton's one cup win was at Talladega, wasn't
He's won 2, and his big one was at Talladega, Talladega 500, I think 71, 72, somewhere along there. And interestingly enough, he beat Darrell Waltrip. Waltrip was dominating that day and went out with a blown engine, and that opened the door for Hilton's biggest win. I talked to Darrell. He said there's even more collection out. When Darrell moved up from the Fairgrounds to the Cup, he wanted 48. He had his old Fairgrounds number was 48.
That was Hilton's number.
He wanted to take 48 to the Cup. Hilton had it and said, nope, I'm not giving it to you. And Darrell said, what a stubborn old coot. But he laughed when he said it.
I guess that's when he kind of adopted the 17.
Well, you got to be stubborn to last in stock car racing for 60 years or however long Hilton's been in it. But what a great story. You know, local kid, bright local kid, Mason Mingus, 18, racing against a 78-year-old veteran, James Hilton, at Talladega Friday.
And Kimmel leading the points is a 9-time champion. I mean, he can't be more than 15, 20 years behind.
Mr. ARCA.
Yeah, he can't be that far behind,
And looks up in his mirror and there's an 18-year-old kid breathing down his neck.
Talladega will be interesting for the ARCA guys because on the big races at Talladega, Daytona, Charlotte, these kind of places, you get a lot of folks who show up, and that's all they do is race 4 or 5 races a year, and they go to the big shows. And Larry, they're pretty well funded for 3 or 4 races, and
hope you can get a pretty good payday out of it. But again, Joe, in the old days, ARCA racing was really scary on those big tracks. And it's still, frankly, it's still kind of scary. There's probably some drivers out there who's with limited talent and ability and frankly, limited equipment too, that's not the best equipment in the world. And sometimes you tend to forget you're going 200 miles an hour around concrete walls because speed's relative, and when everybody else is going 200, you tend not to realize how fast and how dangerous it is. I just hope these kids, these drivers, and particularly youngsters like Mason, are kind of keep that in mind. It's still a scary race.
It's most of them will tell you, though, it's not the speed, it's the stop. That's what will get you. Now, speaking of stops, real quick, Larry, we talked some about Richmond, and you got a lot of folks that went beating and banging, rubbing and nudging on each other. And we go from a short track to the biggest track in the series. Larry, these guys, fortunately, I hope, have enough sense to know that when everybody gets payback eventually, but this ain't the week to be thinking about it.
This is no time for Tony Stewart's silly pushing and shoving. I remember I talked to Jeff Burton years ago. I was at Talladega doing a story about just what you said, the white knuckle racing. Jeff Burton, Joe, said Talladega is the one race he goes into where he has trouble sleeping at night. And Jeff Burton's race, of course, for years and years, and on every track in the circuit, Talladega is the one track that keeps Jeff awake. I thought that was pretty. I've always remembered that when Talladega comes up, an old veteran like Jeff Burton, and he still gets the Talladega jitters.
I think that's enough said right there. That kind of sets up the weekend. It'll be a fun weekend to watch. Tell you what, we'll come back, wrap this up with talk about the local racetrack here in the area, Highland Rim, and what they've got going. Rained out last week, but more up their sleeve. Stay with us. We'll come back.
The Highland Rim jitters.
Yeah.
Today's show is brought to you by locally owned and operated Highland Rim Speedway. Visit their website at highlandrim.com.
Welcome back, everybody, to Pit Pass. Larry Woody and Joe Williams. Larry, we talked a little bit about the last segment about the mayor's budget. They will be running at Fairgrounds this week. Sterling Marlin will be there.
Yep.
So
3-time champion.
Yeah.
I think Sterling won one of his division race in the season opener. So
yeah.
Sterling hadn't lost anything over the years.
Grandpa again.
That's right.
Got another new grandbaby, Sutherland, his daughter, and her husband Michael House.
Yep.
Welcoming in.
Congratulations to him. Great family.
Yeah.
Great family.
Good folks.
Yep.
Speaking of racing, nobody raced last weekend here in Middle Tennessee. Larry, the rain killed us. Highland Rim had their plans for the big 40-lap tuner event that got washed out. They've rescheduled it for this Saturday night, which is the 4th, I believe. And it's May 4th, I think. But it's,
Saturday night.
Hey, it's Wednesday. I'm lost. But it's Saturday night.
You can't count that high.
Yeah, I count my fingers. But they're going to rerun that 40-lapper. Your buddy and my friend Mike Organ wrote a great piece this week in the Tennessean about Zena Jenkins, who, by the way, has flat run away with the first 2 tuner races at the Rim and looked awful good. She's won titles there before. Couple of things that I did not know, and I am anxious to follow up on. Imagine Organ teaching me something.
Yeah, Mike Organ.
That's nothing new. Zena, a grandmother, is not your typical grandmother.
The racing granny, as she called herself.
Yeah, I mean, Larry, you ever wanted to get in a car?
No, just standing near one's good enough for
That's
me.
okay.
But Joe, these are some of the great human interest stories that we've talked about before. When we talked to Buddy Williams and some of the Highland Rim people up there, there's just a wealth of these stories that are great human interest stories. And Mike Organ at the Tennessean mined one of these stories. Got a good picture of Zena, and the warrior princess or the racing granny, whichever you prefer. But there's just no end of these great human interest stories at these little tracks around the state, like at Highland Rim and the old fairgrounds. And I'm glad to see Oregon doing it. And I think it's, in my opinion, it was the best read story in the newspaper that day. Sports section, any other part of my old newspaper.
I think you're probably right.
ton of good stories. Sure. If the media will get out there and get them.
And find, and just go to work.
Right.
You used to have to do that. A couple of things, though, that you may not know, just for fun. Zena has won the first 2 races of the year and finishing second in both of those races. Toby Old Man Tobit. Here's something else you might not know. Both of those guys, and you'll figure out where this is coming from. I'm sorry. She and he, both those guys, both of these drivers are old East Nashville grads, East Nashville High School grads. Not that that's a big deal for me.
But you being an East Nashville grad.
And it's funny, Toby's about 2 years ahead of me, so I now call him old man. And it's funny, Larry, working up there doing a little announcing, he came up to me after the first week, he said, "You've done me in." Never mess with a man with a microphone, Toby. It's now his nickname, old man. You gotta love
The guy with the mic always gets the last word, right?
Well, it's just like the guy, don't fight the guy who buys his ink by the barrel.
That's what I told Tony Stewart that time.
Well,
and to be clear, going back to Tony, I was kind of tough on him, I guess. I like Tony Stewart. He's maybe the greatest all-around driver in NASCAR, in any form of racing. Like I said, he's this generation's A.J. Ford. I think the world of Tony, and that's why sometimes I'm disappointed in him. If you don't care about somebody, you can't be disappointed in him. But I like Tony, and that's why some of his actions I'm a little disappointed, some of his petty, peevish ways. But I guess that's just Tony. He can't help himself.
Well,
He's intense, as A.J.
Yes.
was. But anyway, back to your point about the Rim. Just another example of these human interest stories and great racing. I mean, these aren't just people who are up there playing around. These guys, there won't be any more intense racing at Talladega this week than there will be at Highland Rim. These people get after it.
Oh, yeah. And these guys are racing so much for pride. It's not the money that they're after.
And maybe that's the biggest incentive of all.
Well, it's the last bastion of pure racing, if you will. Sure. I mean, it's just like I'm convinced high school football or high school athletics, period, the last bastion of pure sport. Yeah. Everything else, the money's gotten too big.
Sure. Whoever finishes last in Sunday's Cup race at Talladega is still going to make $100,000 or more. And I think last year the 43rd driver in the Cup standing still made about $4 million. So you can go out there, ride around a few laps, and still be a multimillionaire. At Highland Rim and these other little tracks, you don't do that. They race for pride, prestige,
just a note,
challenge.
Yeah. Another trivial note for the weekend: dead last at Richmond in the Cup race, paid $4,000 more than the winner's share of the Friday night race.
Yeah, the nationwide race, which is another reason, as we've said so many times before, why the nationwide series is in big trouble and getting worse every day, every year. And I'm not smart enough to know the solution. We've had this discussion a lot of times. They've got some major problems, but I don't know how to fix them.
I think you're probably right. I think we're past the point of being able to go back too much.
Yeah.
To jump around on you a little bit, qualifying, I believe, scheduled for 4 o'clock at the Rim. First race, 6 o'clock this Saturday. get off at Bethel Road and just follow it. Just keep on Bethel Road. It'll dead end, and you'll see the racetrack. It's
That's
right
right.
and a left on Kelly Willis, and you're there.
Actually, Highland Rim Speedway exit on the
Yes.
sign on the I-65. Go about 20 miles north of Nashville and turn where it says Highland Rim Speedway.
Yeah.
Easy to find.
And-
Follow the noise.
Yeah, coming up next week, 2-day deal with the Southern All-Stars coming in. That will be a race because it'll bring back local favorites Mark Day, Davey Coble, and a bunch of others. So that'll be, I would expect to see possibly Michael House and Sterling. Maybe. Maybe. I don't know. That's not a track thing.
If Michael can get off diaper changing duty.
Well, yeah. If
Sterling's
Sterling's
son-in-law with the new grandbaby.
Well, that's going to do it for us this week on Pit Pass. Larry, thank you so much. It's been
Enjoyed
a
it,
good
Joe.
day.
It's fun.
Next week, we'll talk a little more about that big show. We'll also hopefully have some details on how the appeals have come out. You know, it's amazing. You used to need a good driver and a good crew chief and a good crew. Then you had to have the engineer. Now, possibly the most important part of your cup race team is your attorney.
That's right. Need a good lawyer.
Welcome.
And we might be able to talk about Mason Mingus getting a big win at Talladega.
We'd like to see him come on. Yeah, with a
always
big
makes
trophy.
it fun when you got a good local driver like Mason Mingus in the field, which you'll be Friday at Talladega.
Yeah. Got some others that have been moving around. We're going to catch up with them too, but that's coming up. Right now, we're out of here. Thank you so much for joining us today on Pit Pass. For Larry Woody, I'm Joe Williams. We'll see you next time right here on Pit Pass.